The water was already lapping at her ankles when Georgia Fletcher realized she had made a terrible mistake. She stood on what had been solid ground that morning in June of 1878, watching the Republican River transform from a gentle stream into a churning monster. The spring rains had been relentless for 3 days, and now the water rose so fast she could see it climbing, inch by terrible inch, up the cottonwood trunk beside her. Her wagon sat useless 20 feet away, one wheel shattered from hitting the rock that had stranded her here on this shrinking island of earth. Her horse had panicked and broken free an hour ago, leaving her alone with nothing but rising water and the cold certainty that she might die here, just 3 miles from Concordia, Kansas, the town she had traveled 800 miles to reach. Georgia was 22 years old, and she had not come all the way from Pennsylvania to drown in a Kansas river. She had come to start a new life, to escape the suffocating expectations of her mother's boarding house and the endless parade of suitable men who wanted a wife to cook and clean and bear children without a thought in her head. She had come west because her aunt's letter promised freedom and possibility, a chance to teach school in a growing town, to be something more than decorative. Now the water was at her knees, her dark traveling dress growing heavy with moisture, and freedom seemed like a bitter joke. She climbed onto the wagon seat, then onto the covered top, scanning the swollen riverbanks for any sign of help. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the damage was done. Upstream, somewhere in the hills, all that water was racing toward her, and there was nowhere left to go. The main channel was 50 feet of angry current. Even if she could swim, which she barely could, the water would dash her against rocks and submerge trees before she made it halfway. That was when she saw him. A rider appeared on the eastern bank, sitting tall on a rangy buckskin horse. Even from this distance, she could see him taking in the situation, his head turning from her to the water to the surrounding terrain, with the quick assessment of someone who knew how to read danger. He wore a brown hat pulled low, a dark vest over a work shirt, and he sat his horse like he had been born in the saddle. Georgia cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted, though the words came out smaller than she intended. "Help, please!" The rider urged his horse closer to the water's edge. She could see him better now, could see the way he studied the current, looking for something. He turned his horse and rode upstream about 30 yards, then came back down, then repeated the process going downstream. He was looking for the best crossing point, she realized, the place where the current might be weakest or the bottom most solid. He did not appear to find what he was looking for, because when he came back to the point directly across from her, he simply sat there for a long moment. She could feel his hesitation across the water, could almost see him weighing the odds. Then he reached up, adjusted his hat, and turned his horse directly toward her. "Wait," she shouted. "The current is too strong." If he heard her, he gave no sign. He touched his heels to the buckskin sides, and the horse stepped into the water. Georgia's hands flew to her mouth as she watched the horse sink to its knees, then its chest, then its shoulders. The rider kept the animal angled upstream, fighting to keep from being swept sideways. Water crashed against them, sending up spray that caught the afternoon light. The horse was swimming now, its powerful legs churning, and the rider leaned forward over its neck, his body moving with the animal, urging it on with voice and hand. Halfway across, the current caught them. Horse and rider swung downstream, and for a horrible moment, Georgia thought they would be swept away. But the rider had anticipated this. He had aimed far enough upstream that when the current grabbed them, it carried them in an arc that brought them closer to her island. The horse found its footing, lost it, found it again. Water streamed from its mane and the rider's clothes as they surged up into shallower water. Then they were there, the horse scrambling up onto her shrinking island, sides heaving, nostrils flared. The rider swung down before the animal had fully stopped, water pouring from his boots and clothes. He was tall, lean in the way of men who worked hard and ate sparingly, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and eyes the color of a summer storm. "We do not have much time," he said, his voice rough and urgent. "This whole spit of land will be underwater in 10 minutes. Can you ride?" "Yes," Georgia said, climbing down from the wagon top on shaking legs. "But your horse, he cannot carry us both across that. He will drown." "Ranger has carried me through worse than this." The rider was already moving, checking the horse's breathing, running his hands over its legs with quick efficiency. "We go now, or we do not go at all. The water is rising too fast." Georgia grabbed her carpetbag from the wagon, the only thing she could reach that mattered. Everything else, her trunk of clothes, her books, her mother's china teapot, would have to stay. She turned back to find the rider already mounted, his hand extended down to her. "I am Isaac," he said. "Isaac Jameson. Give me your hand." She reached up, and his hand closed around hers, strong and sure. He pulled, and she pushed off the ground, and then she was swinging up behind him, her wet skirts tangled and heavy, her arms instinctively wrapping around his waist. She could feel the cold of his soaked shirt, the warmth of his body underneath, the solid reality of him. "Hold tight," Isaac said. "Do not let go no matter what happens." He turned Ranger back toward the water, and Georgia felt the horse tense beneath them. The island had shrunk to almost nothing. Water swirled around Ranger's hooves, pulling at them, eager. Isaac made a sound low in his throat, half word and half encouragement, and Ranger stepped forward into the current. The cold hit Georgia like a fist, stealing her breath. Water rose around them with terrifying speed, up to her knees, her waist, her ribs. She tightened her arms around Isaac, feeling his muscles strain as he kept Ranger's head pointed toward the far bank. The horse was swimming again, but this time with double the weight, and she could feel the animal struggling. The current grabbed them harder than before, spinning them downstream. Georgia saw a massive tree trunk rushing toward them, branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Isaac saw it too. He threw his weight to the side, pulling Ranger's head around, and the horse responded with a burst of strength that took them just past the tree's grasping limbs. "Good boy, that is good," Isaac said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Almost there, Ranger, almost home." The horse's hooves struck something solid, lost it, struck again. Georgia felt them rising from the water, felt Ranger's powerful haunches bunching as he climbed the bank. Then they were up, water streaming from all of them, and Isaac kept Ranger moving away from the edge onto solid ground. He rode another 100 feet before he finally stopped and swung down. Georgia tried to dismount, but her legs would not work properly. She started to slide, and Isaac was there, catching her, setting her gently on her feet. His hands stayed on her arms until he was sure she could stand. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his gray eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breathless. "No," she managed. "No, I am fine, thanks to you." Isaac stepped back, and she felt the loss of his steadying hands. He turned to Ranger, running his palms over the horse's body, checking for injuries with the same thorough care he had shown before the crossing. The buckskin stood with his head down, breathing hard but steady. "You risked your life," Georgia said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, thin and shaky. "You could have drowned, so could you?" Isaac glanced at her, then back at his horse. "Could not leave you there. Most men would have gone for help. No time for that. You saw how fast it was rising." He straightened, seeming satisfied that Ranger was uninjured beyond exhaustion. "You were headed to Concordia." "Yes. My aunt lives there, Sarah Fletcher. Do you know her, the school teacher?" Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. "Everyone knows Miss Sarah. You must be the niece from back east, Georgia Fletcher. She has been talking about your visit for weeks." Isaac picked up Ranger's reins. "Town is about 3 miles east. We should start walking. Ranger needs rest before he carries anyone again." They walked in silence for a while, leading the tired horse between them. George's dress hung heavy and cold, and she could feel blisters forming in her wet boots, but she was alive. She kept glancing at Isaac, trying to reconcile the quiet man beside her with the one who had ridden into that deadly current without hesitation. "What were you doing out here?" she asked finally. "It seems lucky timing. Was checking fences on the north section of my land. Saw the storm damage and was heading back when I spotted your wagon." He paused. "Lucky timing seems about right. Your land? You have a ranch, small spread. Cattle mostly, some horses. Nothing fancy, but it is mine." There was quiet pride in those last words. The sun was lowering toward the horizon when the buildings of Concordia finally came into view. It was larger than Georgia had expected, with proper streets and brick buildings mixed among the wooden structures. People were out despite the muddy conditions, and several called greetings to Isaac as they passed. "Isaac, what happened to you two?" A portly man in an apron hurried over from what appeared to be a general store. "River crossing," Isaac said simply. "Can someone fetch Sarah Fletcher? Her niece is here." Word spread quickly. Within minutes, Aunt Sarah came running, her gray streaked hair escaping its pins, her face flushed with worry and relief. She wrapped Georgia in a fierce hug, not caring about the wet clothes. "Oh, my dear girl, we heard about the flooding, but I had no idea you were caught in it. You poor thing, you must be frozen through." Sarah pulled back, holding Georgia at arm's length to study her, then turned to Isaac. "And you pulled her out?" "Isaac Jameson, you are either the bravest man in Kansas or the most foolish." "Bit of both, probably," Isaac said. His eyes met Georgia's for a moment, and she saw something there that made warmth spread through her chest despite her cold, damp clothes. "Come along, both of you," Sarah said, already steering Georgia toward a neat white house at the end of the street. "Isaac, you will stay for supper. No arguments. It is the least we can do." Georgia thought Isaac might refuse, but he nodded. "Let me get Ranger settled at the livery first. I will come by in an hour." He touched the brim of his hat to them both and led his horse away, his long stride purposeful. Georgia watched him go, feeling strangely bereft. Sarah's house was warm and cozy, filled with books and the smell of bread baking. She hustled Georgia upstairs to a small bedroom and provided a hot bath, clean clothes, and stern instructions to warm up thoroughly. By the time Georgia came back downstairs in one of Sarah's dresses, altered hastily to fit, she felt almost human again. "Tell me everything," Sarah said, pressing a cup of hot tea into Georgia's hands. They sat in the parlor and Georgia recounted the whole terrifying experience. Sarah's face grew pale as she listened. "That river has taken lives before," Sarah said quietly. "The fact that Isaac crossed it twice, once with you on the horse, that takes extraordinary courage and skill." She looked at Georgia with knowing eyes. "He is a good man. Lost his parents to cholera 5 years ago, took over the family ranch when he was barely 20. Works harder than anyone I know, and he has built something solid out there." "He did not hesitate," Georgia said, remembering that moment on the bank when Isaac had simply pointed his horse toward her and started across. "He saw I needed help and he came. That is Isaac." Sarah smiled. "Not much of a talker, but his actions speak volumes." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah rose to answer it, and Isaac stepped inside, transformed. He had cleaned up, changed into fresh clothes, his dark hair still damp but combed back. Without the mud and river water, Georgia could see him properly for the first time. He had a strong, honest face with a straight nose and a jaw that suggested stubbornness. But it was his eyes that caught her, those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see more than they revealed. Supper was pot roast with potatoes and carrots, and Sarah kept the conversation flowing with questions about Isaac's ranch and stories about Concordia. Georgia learned that the town had been founded less than a decade ago, that it was growing steadily, that there was talk of the railroad coming through in the next few years. Georgia is going to take over the upper grades at the school, Sarah said proudly. I have been managing all the students myself, but we have too many children now. We need another teacher. Can you start Monday? Isaac asked, looking at Georgia directly. Or do you need time to recover from today? Monday is fine, Georgia said. I did not come all this way to rest. Something flickered in Isaac's eyes. You have sand. That is good. You will need it here. Sand. Georgia raised an eyebrow. Grit. Toughness. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Eastern ladies do not always take well to Kansas. This Eastern lady just survived a flooding river, Georgia pointed out. I think I can handle Kansas. This time Isaac definitely smiled, and it changed his whole face, warming it, making him look younger. I believe you can. After supper, Isaac stood to leave. Thank you for the meal, Miss Sarah. Best I have had in weeks. You are welcome anytime, you know that. Sarah walked him to the door, Georgia following. And Isaac, thank you for bringing my girl home safe. Isaac nodded, then turned to Georgia. Welcome to Concordia, Miss Fletcher. I hope it proves worthy of your journey. After today, anything else will seem easy, Georgia said. He held her gaze for a moment longer, and she felt that same flutter in her chest, that same awareness that something significant had happened between them in that river. Then he was gone, striding into the gathering darkness. Georgia slept deeply that night despite everything, exhausted by fear and cold and the sheer emotional weight of the day. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the lace curtains, and she could hear birds singing. She lay there for a moment, remembering the feeling of Isaac's solid warmth in front of her, her arms wrapped around him, his calm voice steadying her as much as his skill had saved her. The next days were busy. Sarah showed Georgia the school, a solid building with 2 rooms and rows of desks. They spent hours going over the curriculum, the students, the expectations. Georgia met the other townspeople, the shopkeepers and the banker and the minister's wife, all of them kind and welcoming. Several mentioned how fortunate she had been that Isaac Jameson had come along when he did. That man has a gift with horses, the livery owner said, and more courage than sense sometimes, begging your pardon, miss. Georgia did not see Isaac himself until Sunday at church. He sat near the back in clean work clothes, his hat on the pew beside him. When he saw her, he nodded, and she felt absurdly pleased by that small acknowledgement. After the service, as people gathered outside to talk, he approached her and Sarah. Miss Fletcher, he said. Miss Sarah, fine sermon today. You say that every week, Sarah teased. Even when Reverend Thompson drones on for an hour about the minor prophets. Isaac's mouth quirked. Respect for the cloth, Miss Sarah. How is Ranger? Georgia asked. She had been worrying about the horse, hoping the difficult crossing had not damaged him. Sound as ever. He is tough. Isaac paused, then added, I wanted to apologize for not checking on you sooner, been busy with the herd. You saved my life, Georgia said. You do not owe me anything else, still. That was a frightening experience. Wanted to make sure you were recovering well. I am, truly. She smiled at him. Tomorrow I start teaching. I am looking forward to it. You will have the Murphy boys in your class, Isaac said. Fair warning, they are handfuls, smart but trouble. I can handle handfuls, Georgia assured him. I believe you. He glanced toward where his horse was tied. I should be getting back. Long ride to the ranch. Come to supper again soon, Sarah invited. Wednesday, perhaps. Isaac hesitated, then nodded. Wednesday would be fine, thank you. He tipped his hat to them both and walked away. Georgia watched him mount up with easy grace and ride out of town. He likes you, Sarah said quietly. Georgia felt her cheeks warm. We barely know each other. He crossed a flooding river for you, that says something. Sarah linked her arm through Georgia's. And unless I miss my guess, you like him too. Georgia could not deny it. There was something about Isaac Jameson that drew her, something beyond gratitude for the rescue. His quiet competence, his understated strength, the way he seemed so solid and real compared to the smooth, talking men back in Pennsylvania, who had courted her with pretty words and empty promises. Monday morning, Georgia stood in front of her classroom of 12 students, ranging from age 10 to 15, and felt more nervous than she had facing the river. But the children were eager and curious, and by lunchtime, she had them organized and working. The Murphy boys did indeed prove to be handfuls, but they were also quick and funny, and she found herself enjoying the challenge. The days fell into a rhythm. Teaching during the week, church on Sunday, quiet evenings with Sarah. It was a good life, purposeful and satisfying. But Georgia found herself thinking often about Isaac, remembering the feeling of safety she had felt with his solid body in front of her, his steady hands on the reins. Wednesday evening, he came for supper as promised. This time, he brought a basket of early strawberries from the wild patch on his property, and Sarah made them into a pie. After they ate, Sarah excused herself to work on lesson plans, leaving Isaac and Georgia alone in the parlor. That was deliberate, Georgia said, watching her aunt disappear upstairs. Miss Sarah is about as subtle as a stampede, Isaac agreed. He stood by the window looking out at the street. She means well. She does. Georgia joined him at the window. The evening light was golden, painting everything warm. Tell me about your ranch. What is it like? Isaac was quiet for a moment, and she thought he might not answer. Then he began to speak, slowly at first, then with more ease. He told her about the land, the 300 acres his father had claimed and worked, the creek that ran through it year-round, the stands of cottonwood and the open prairie. He told her about building up the herd, about learning to read weather and grass and cattle, about the satisfaction of making something grow and thrive. Sounds lonely, Georgia observed. It can be, Isaac admitted. Hired man comes to help with heavy work, but day to day it is just me and the animals. I do not mind that much, though. Always been comfortable with quiet. I like quiet too, Georgia said. One of the reasons I left Pennsylvania. Everyone always talking, so much noise, so many expectations. She smiled ruefully. My mother wanted me to marry her friend's son. Nice enough man, but boring as drying paint. He wanted a wife who would be decorative and silent. Their loss, Isaac said quietly. You are too alive for that. The words, simple and earnest, touched something deep inside her. Thank you for saying that. He turned to face her fully. I mean it. You have fire in you. Saw it when you were stranded on that island. Saw it when you talked about handling the Murphy boys. You are not the kind of woman who should be locked in a parlor somewhere. What kind of woman am I? The question came out more breathless than she intended. Isaac held her gaze, and the air between them seemed to thicken. The kind who deserves a life as big as she wants to make it. They stood there, close enough that she could have reached out and touched him, far enough that propriety was maintained. But the space between them felt charged, alive with possibility. Sarah's footsteps on the stairs broke the moment. Isaac stepped back, and when Sarah entered the room they were a respectable distance apart. Getting late, Isaac said. I should head home while there is still light. He left soon after, but the feeling of that moment lingered. Georgia lay in bed that night, wide awake, thinking about storm-gray eyes and quiet words that meant more than flowery speeches. The weeks passed. Isaac began finding reasons to come to town more often. Sometimes he stopped by the school during lunch, bringing apples from the tree by his house or interesting rocks for the nature studies Georgia did with the students. Sometimes he came for supper at Sarah's invitation, which became a weekly event. And sometimes, on Saturday afternoons, he invited Georgia to ride out and see his ranch. Those Saturday rides became the highlight of Georgia's week. Mounted on a gentle mare named Daisy that Isaac kept just for these occasions, she saw the land through his eyes. He showed her where the cattle grazed, the line of trees that marked the creek, the cabin his father had built and that Isaac was slowly expanding. It was rough country, beautiful and harsh, and she fell in love with it almost as much as she was falling in love with the man who worked it. Because she was falling in love, she could not deny it anymore. It was there in the way her heart lifted when she saw him, in the way she listened for his voice, in the way she dreamed about him at night. And if the way he looked at her was any indication, he felt the same, but Isaac was cautious. He never touched her beyond helping her mount or dismount, never spoke words of love, though his eyes said plenty. Georgia understood. He was a man who took things seriously, who would not speak until he was certain, and she could wait, because she was certain enough for both of them. It was late August, 3 months after the river rescue, when everything changed. Georgia was at the school, staying late to prepare lessons for the next week, when she heard horses approaching fast. She looked out the window to see Isaac riding up, and her heart leaped. But when he swung down, she saw his face was grim. She met him at the door. "What is wrong?" "Fire," Isaac said tersely. "Lightning strike started a prairie fire about 5 miles west. Wind is pushing it this direction. We are organizing a fire break, but I wanted to make sure you and Sarah know to be ready to evacuate if needed." "What can I do to help?" Georgia asked immediately. "Get Sarah and pack essential items. If you see smoke getting close, head east toward the river." He paused. "I have to go back, help with the fire line." "Be careful," Georgia said, touching his arm. It was the first time she had initiated contact, and his eyes widened slightly. "Always am," he said. Then he was gone, riding hard back toward the west. Georgia ran to Sarah's house and found her aunt already packing. "Heard the warning bell from the church," Sarah explained. "We should be prepared." They worked quickly, gathering important documents, clothing, food. Other townspeople were doing the same, faces worried. The sky to the west had taken on a strange orange cast, and the smell of smoke drifted on the wind. Hours passed. Men came and went, soot-stained and exhausted, grabbing food and water before heading back to fight the fire. Georgia and Sarah and the other women set up a station providing refreshments and medical supplies for burns. Still no word from Isaac. As evening fell, the smoke grew thicker. The church bell rang 3 times, the signal to evacuate. Sarah and Georgia loaded their packed items into a wagon and joined the stream of people heading east. Georgia kept looking back, searching for a tall figure on a buckskin horse, but she did not see him. They made camp by the river, far enough from danger. All around them, families huddled together, watching the orange glow on the western horizon. Georgia could not sit still. She paced, her stomach churning with worry. "He will be fine," Sarah said, but her voice was uncertain. "He knows this land better than anyone." It was near midnight when the men started returning. They came in groups, blackened and exhausted, reporting that the fire had been stopped. The fire break had held. Concordia was safe, but Isaac was not among them. Georgia's worry transformed into cold fear. She approached every returning group, asking about him. No one had seen him in the last few hours. "Last I saw, he was working the southern end of the break," one man said. "That was before sunset." Georgia could not wait any longer. She found Daisy among the evacuated horses, saddled her with shaking hands, and mounted up. "Georgia, what are you doing?" Sarah rushed over. "I am going to find him," Georgia said. Her voice was steady even though she felt anything but, "It is too dangerous. The fire might still be burning in places." "I do not care." Georgia gathered the reins. "He came into a flooding river for me. I can ride through some smoke for him." Before Sarah could stop her, Georgia urged Daisy forward, heading west toward the smoke and danger. She followed the path she knew the men had taken, letting Daisy pick her way carefully through the darkness. The smell of smoke grew stronger and ash drifted down like black snow. She found him near the creek, slumped against a cottonwood tree. Ranger stood nearby, reins trailing. In the moonlight, she could see Isaac's face was pale, his shirt torn and bloodied on one side. Georgia was off Daisy before she fully thought about it, running to him, falling to her knees beside him. "Isaac, Isaac, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open. "Georgia, what are you doing here?" "Looking for you, you stubborn man." She examined him quickly, her hands gentle but efficient. He had a nasty burn on his side where burning debris had apparently caught him, and possibly a couple of cracked ribs from the way he winced when he breathed. "I am fine," he protested. "Just needed to rest a minute. You are hurt." She pulled off her shawl and pressed it carefully against the burn to protect it. "Can you ride?" "Yes." He started to push himself up, made it halfway, and went white. Georgia caught him, her arm around his shoulders. He was heavy and solid, and she could feel him trembling with effort. "Easy. Slow." Together they got him upright. Ranger came over at Georgia's whistle, the well-trained horse standing steady as they maneuvered Isaac into the saddle. He swayed, and Georgia realized he would never make it back alone. She mounted Daisy, brought the mare alongside Ranger, and reached over to steady Isaac. "I am right here. Hold on." They rode slowly back toward the river camp, Georgia keeping one hand on Isaac's arm the whole way, ready to catch him if he started to fall. By the time they reached the camp, word had spread, and people rushed to help. They got Isaac down, and Sarah immediately took charge, cleaning and dressing the burn with the medical supplies they had brought. "Needs proper doctoring," Sarah said. "But this will do for tonight. The burn is not too deep, but those ribs are definitely cracked." Isaac, lying on a blanket by the fire, caught George's hand. "You should not have come after me. Was dangerous." "You crossed a river for me," Georgia said simply. "Did you think I would do less?" His fingers tightened around hers. "Stubborn woman." "Stubborn man." They stared at each other, and something passed between them that needed no words. Sarah, watching them, smiled and quietly moved away to give them privacy. "Georgia," Isaac said, his voice rough with more than smoke. "I have been trying to do this right, to take things slow, but tonight when I thought I might not make it back, all I could think about was you, about how I never told you that I love you." Her breath caught. "Isaac, let me finish." He pushed himself up slightly, wincing but determined. "I love you. I have loved you since you climbed onto my horse behind me and held on like you trusted me with your life. I love your fire and your courage and the way you look at my land like you see what it could be. I love how you handle those Murphy boys and how you stand up to me when you think I am wrong. I love you, Georgia Fletcher, and I want you to stay here in Kansas. With me. As my wife, if you will have me." Tears spilled down Georgia's cheeks. "You foolish, wonderful man. Of course I will have you." "I love you too. I have loved you for months, waiting for you to say something, to give me some sign." "I was afraid," Isaac admitted. "Afraid you would miss the East, miss civilization, miss having an easier life than what I can offer." I do not want easier, Georgia said fiercely. She leaned down and kissed him gently, carefully, mindful of his injuries. I want real. I want you. I want this wild, beautiful, impossible place, and I want to build a life here. Isaac's good arm came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. You are everything I never knew to hope for. She kissed him again, deeper this time, and felt him respond despite his pain, felt the warmth and promise and future in that kiss. Around them, people politely looked away, but Georgia could sense their approval, their happiness for the match. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Isaac smiled at her with such open joy that her heart felt too big for her chest. When you are healed, she said, we are getting married. I am not waiting any longer than necessary. Bossy, Isaac said, but he was grinning. I like it. They spent that night by the fire, Georgia sitting beside Isaac's blanket, his hand in hers, talking quietly about the future. They would marry as soon as he recovered. She would continue teaching, at least for a while, but in the summers she would help with the ranch. Eventually they would expand, build a bigger house, maybe raise horses alongside the cattle. They would fill that house with love and laughter, and someday, children by morning, the fire was fully out and people began returning to Concordia. The town had been spared, though some outlying properties had suffered damage. Isaac's ranch was safe, protected by the creek, and the firebreak the men had fought so hard to maintain. They were married in late September, in the little church in Concordia with the whole town in attendance. Georgia wore a simple cream-colored dress Sarah had helped her sew, and Isaac stood at the altar in his best suit, his side still bandaged but healing well. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed her thoroughly enough to make several of the older ladies fan themselves, and Georgia laughed against his mouth, gloriously happy. The wedding supper was held in the town hall, with food contributed by everyone. People danced and celebrated late into the night. Georgia danced with Isaac despite his protests about his ribs, and later they danced with nearly everyone in town, accepting congratulations and good wishes. As the evening wound down, they slipped away, riding together on Ranger toward Isaac's ranch. Their ranch now, Georgia corrected herself. The moon was full, lighting their way, and the September air was cool and sweet. Happy? Isaac asked, his arm around her waist as they rode. More than I knew I could be, Georgia said honestly. She leaned back against him, feeling safe and cherished and home. You? Everything I wanted, Isaac said. Right here. The cabin looked different to Georgia now that it was hers. Isaac carried her over the threshold despite her protests about his ribs, and set her gently down in the main room. Someone, probably Sarah, had been here earlier. Lanterns were lit, flowers sat in jars on the table, and the bed in the corner was made up with fresh linens. Sarah is a romantic, Georgia said, smiling at the flowers. Good thing, Isaac said. Since she schemed to get us together, did she? I thought it was fate. Maybe both. Isaac pulled her close, his hands on her waist, his eyes serious. I will work hard to make you happy, Georgia. To give you a good life here. We will make it together, Georgia corrected. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw. I am not some delicate flower you need to protect. I am your partner. My partner, Isaac repeated, testing the words. Then he smiled, that rare, warm smile that transformed his face. I like that. Partners. He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise, and Georgia felt desire bloom inside her, hot and sweet. They had waited, been proper, but now they were married and alone, and there was nothing to stop them from showing each other the depth of their feelings. They made love slowly that first time, learning each other's bodies with gentle hands and whispered words. Isaac was careful of his injured side, but his passion was no less for it. Georgia had never known physical love could be like this, tender and fierce at once, giving and taking in equal measure. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Isaac's arm around her, Georgia's head on his chest. She could hear his heart beating steady and strong beneath her ear. "I was so scared when I could not find you after the fire," she said quietly. "I realized then that I could not bear to lose you, that you had become everything to me." Isaac's arm tightened around her. "I know the feeling. When I saw you stranded in that river, something in me just knew, this woman matters. This woman is mine to protect." He paused. "Except you do not need much protecting, do you?" "Everyone needs protecting sometimes," Georgia said, "and everyone needs someone to come after them when they are lost. We can do that for each other." "Always," Isaac promised, "for the rest of our lives." They fell asleep wrapped together, and Georgia dreamed of a future full of bright mornings and hard work, and the steady warmth of Isaac's love. That future unfolded in ways both expected and surprising. Georgia continued teaching through the school year, and Isaac worked the ranch, building up the herd with careful breeding and good management. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch Isaac built that first spring of their marriage, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, talking about everything and nothing. Their first child came in the summer of 1880, a squalling red-faced boy they named James. Isaac held his son with such tenderness that Georgia cried, watching her strong, quiet husband transformed by love for this tiny person. James had his father's gray eyes and his mother's stubborn chin, and from the start, he was a handful. Georgia took a break from teaching to care for James, but she found she did not mind as much as she thought she would. There was satisfaction in raising their son, in managing the household, in helping Isaac when she could. And Sarah still came out often, bringing news from town, helping with the baby, making sure Georgia did not feel too isolated. When James was 2, their daughter arrived. They named her Rose, and she was everything James was not: quiet, thoughtful, observant. She had Isaac's dark hair and George's green eyes, and a smile that could light up a room. The ranch prospered. Isaac proved to have a gift for breeding horses, and soon they had a small but growing reputation for quality stock. Georgia kept the books, managed the finances, and proved to be as shrewd with numbers as she was with lesson planning. Together they saved and planned and built. By 1885, they had expanded the cabin into a proper house, with separate bedrooms for the children and a big kitchen where Georgia could cook and bake. They had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the growing herd, and Georgia had started teaching again, taking on a few students who came to the ranch twice a week for lessons. Life was not always easy. There were droughts that dried up the grass and made them worry about the cattle. There were hard winters when they huddled around the stove and rationed food. There was the year James broke his arm falling from a tree and Georgia nearly lost her mind with worry. There was the stillborn baby between Rose and their 3rd child, a grief they carried quietly together. But through it all, there was love. Isaac still looked at Georgia like she was the answer to every question he had ever asked. Georgia still felt her heart lift when she saw him riding in from the range. They still made love with passion and tenderness, still talked late into the night, still worked side by side as true partners. Their 3rd living child came in 1887, another boy they named Daniel. He had Georgia's temperament, bright and curious and unafraid of anything. With 3 children running around, the house was never quiet, but Isaac and Georgia thrived on the organized chaos. James grew tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet competence around animals. Rose developed a love of books and learning, and Georgia dreamed of sending her to a proper school someday, maybe even college. Daniel was still young, but already he showed signs of being the most social of the three, making friends with everyone he met. On their 10th anniversary, Isaac surprised Georgia by taking her back to the spot where he had pulled her from the river. The Republican River flowed peacefully that day, nothing like the raging monster it had been a decade before. "Hard to believe it was so terrifying that day," Georgia said, standing on the bank with Isaac's arm around her. "Best day of my life," Isaac said. "Day I found you." "You could have drowned," Georgia pointed out, as she had many times over the years. "Worth the risk." He turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes serious. "Every risk I have ever taken for you with you has been worth it. You made my life into something I never imagined it could be." "We made it together," Georgia said, echoing words from their wedding night. "Everything we have, we built together." Isaac kissed her there on the riverbank, and Georgia felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt that first day, holding on to him as Ranger swam through the current. Some things never faded. Some loves only grew stronger. They stood there for a long time, watching the water flow by, remembering and planning and simply being together. Then they rode home to their children, their ranch, their life. The years continued to unfold in a pattern of seasons and growth. By 1895, James was 15 and working the ranch alongside his father, already showing the judgment and skill that would make him a fine rancher someday. Rose, at 13, was the best student in Concordia's school, and Georgia was indeed saving money to send her to the teacher's college in Salina. Daniel, at 8, was everyone's favorite, charming and helpful and always ready with a joke. Georgia was 40 by then, her dark hair showing threads of silver, her hands work roughened but capable. Isaac, at 43, had weathered into a leaner, harder version of the young man who had rescued her. But his eyes still softened when he looked at her, and his love had never wavered. They added a fourth child in 1890, a surprise daughter they named Sarah after George's aunt, who cried when they told her. Little Sarah was a perfect combination of both parents, with Isaac's steadiness and George's fire, and she kept the whole family on their toes. The ranch was nearly 1,000 acres now, with a substantial herd of cattle and horses. They employed 5 hands, and Isaac was respected throughout the county as a fair boss and a skilled rancher. Georgia had taken over running the new school that had been built near their property, teaching children from several surrounding farms. She loved the work, loved seeing young minds open to knowledge and possibility. They faced challenges, of course. The economic panic of 1893 hit them hard, and they had to tighten their belts and sell off some stock to weather it. Isaac's hired man, Tom, broke his leg badly and needed months of care, which they provided without question. Rose contracted pneumonia one terrible winter and nearly died, leaving both Isaac and Georgia gray with fear until she finally recovered. But they always came through. Together, they were strong enough to face anything. On a spring evening in 1898, Georgia and Isaac sat on their porch watching the sunset, as they had done thousands of times before. James was 20 now, courting a nice girl from town. Rose was preparing to leave for college in the fall. Daniel was showing an interest in becoming a veterinarian, fascinated by animal medicine. Little Sarah, at 8, was already declaring she would be a rancher like Papa. "We did well," Isaac said quietly, his hand finding George's. "Raised good children, built something solid." "We did," Georgia agreed. She squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength still there after all these years. "And we are not done yet. We have many years ahead of us." "Going to hold you to that," Isaac said. He pulled her close and she rested her head on his shoulder, content. The sky blazed with color as the sun sank toward the horizon. Across the prairie, cattle lowed softly. From inside the house, they could hear their children's voices, laughing about something. The evening air smelled of grass and growing things and possibility. Georgia thought back to that terrified young woman stranded on an island in a rising river, certain she was going to die. She thought about the cowboy who had ridden into the current to save her, risking everything without hesitation. She thought about all the moments since then, the big ones and the small ones, that had woven together into a life of such richness and meaning that sometimes she could hardly believe it was real. "I love you," she said to Isaac, as she had said countless times before and would say countless times again. "Thank you for riding into that river." Isaac turned his head to kiss her forehead, gentle and familiar and full of devotion. "Thank you for holding on," he replied, "for choosing this life. For choosing me." "Always," Georgia said, "for the rest of our days and beyond." They sat together as the stars began to emerge, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely way, in the wildest circumstances, and built something beautiful from that moment of courage and faith. The Wild West was settling, becoming more civilized with each passing year, but some things remained timeless. Love, partnership, the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived together. And in the house behind them, their children grew and learned and dreamed, carrying forward the legacy of courage and love that had begun with a flooding river, and a cowboy brave enough to cross it for a woman he had never met, but somehow knew was meant to be his. This was their story, and it was complete, a circle closed with love and commitment and the absolute certainty that they had found in each other exactly what they were meant to find: a partner, a lover, a friend, a home. The Wild West had tested them both, but together they had not just survived but thrived, proving that the greatest adventures are not the ones we face alone, but the ones we share with the person who makes us brave enough to face anything. Georgia and Isaac Jameson lived out their remaining years on that Kansas ranch, surrounded by children and eventually grandchildren, their love story becoming the stuff of family legend. They were buried side by side in the Concordia cemetery when their time came, many years later, their headstones simply stating their names and the truth that mattered most: together forever. But that ending was far in the future. For now, on this spring evening in 1898, they were alive and in love and together, exactly where they belonged, exactly who they were meant to be. And that was everything.